Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 2 of the Purpose-Driven Business Summit. We're really glad, those of you that are here with us live, that you've chosen to make time to learn some more things about purpose. This is going to be a really great session because we have Dr. John Izzo, who is the author of basically my favorite purpose book. So we're going to pick his brain for lots of insights on what he's seeing about purpose in companies of all sizes. But before we start with that, I want to give you a few reminders for those of you that want to listen to this recording again or any of the other speaker recordings. Make sure you use the link that I keep sending out in email correspondence, because I've put all the recordings in a YouTube playlist. But if you go searching for it, you're not going to find it. You actually have to use the link because it's unlisted. But then you're welcome to go in and listen as much as you'd like. I also want to remind you about the private Facebook group. We've got quite a lot of people in there. We haven't seen a whole lot of conversation, but I want to remind you that the reason we set that up is because, especially in these times of Zoom, we're not able to congregate around the coffee pot or the water station. So it is a way that you can get to know other people that are interested in purpose-driven business, doing good in the world, using business as a force for good. So please do share what you're up to and share any ahas you have as you listen to the speakers. And if you have questions, please put those in there as well. It's a great place to do some networking and hear what other people are up to. So I'll remind you of that again at the end of our time. But those are my logistical reminders for now. Again, welcome to those of you that are here live and those of you that are listening to this as a recording. I'm really excited that Dr. John Izzo has agreed to speak with us here at the Purpose-Driven Business Summit. He is a wealth of knowledge on purpose and awakening the corporate soul, which is the name of another one of his books. He has spoken to over 1 million people. He's advised over 500 companies worldwide, everybody from IBM, Qantas, the Mayo Clinic, Verizon, Humana, Microsoft. He's a wealth of knowledge. So I'm really, really pleased that he made time to be here today. So John, thank you a ton.
Thank you, Sue. Great to be here, and welcome to everyone who's watching now or later.
Well, so, I just told people the tip of the iceberg about your background. Before we launch into some of the specifics about some of the key insights you offer in your book, tell us a little more about you and how you came to be interested in purpose in business. I think that would be really interesting for all of us.
Sure. Well, I grew up in New York City and born in a log cabin. No, just kidding. We won't go through every detail of my life, but I tell you, get two important things that really catapulted me into this work. I was always a do-gooder, so I grew up in New York. I actually had no interest in business, to be honest. I was kind of had 3 careers I considered in my life. Journalism, because it was during the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War, and I wanted to tell the story of what was happening and and do something. Second, I was going to go to law school and become, get into politics. And at the time, unlike today, it was still a pretty noble profession. There were a lot of really, still a lot of good people in politics, but it wasn't slammed in the way it is today. And then finally, I had grown up in a fairly religious home in New York City in a Presbyterian church there. And the third career I considered was as a Presbyterian minister. And that's the one I chose. I got my undergraduate degree in sociology and journalism. I went to Chicago, to the University of Chicago, where I studied and then wound up spending 8 years as a Presbyterian minister. And it was in my second church in Youngstown, Ohio, that really catapulted me into the work that I'm doing today. I was a young minister in my maybe late 20s, 26, 27. And I had these steel mills were all closing around me in Youngstown, Ohio. And it was devastating for the community. And in many ways, the community has never recovered, even to this day. And I'll never forget, I had an elder in my church named Hollis. And Hollis was probably about 55 years old at the time. And he was one of those guys you could tell that once upon a time there was a spark in this guy's eye. He was like alive, but he wasn't alive anymore. He was like a walking zombie. And it took me a while to realize as I got to know him that it was how he had been treated at work and his experience from 9 to 5 in those steel mills as a middle manager, and the lack of dignity and respect with which he had been treated had literally destroyed him psychologically and spiritually. And as a young minister, I realized that I couldn't repair on Sunday in an hour what happened to people for 40 hours during the week. I went back to get a PhD in organizational communication and got a fire in the belly for the impact work had on people's lives and on society. And, now, 35 years later, I've spent my whole life trying to make business more noble, more respectful. And I happen to always believe that it would also be good business, that if you treated people with dignity and added value to communities and to people's lives, you would be more successful. So I was lucky, I guess, in the sense that I was ahead of the curve in thinking about that idea. And so that's how I got into this. And so I'm an accidental tourist into the business world, though I did discover that I had do-gooder values, but a type A entrepreneurial energy. So the business world actually fit my energy as well. So anyway, that's my story, and that's how I began in this work. I have Hollis to thank. I hope I've helped some Hollises over the years to live better lives because of the work that I've done.
Well, that's great that you were able to see that, connect the dots, and then you dedicated yourself to helping figure out how to convince business leaders, basically, how to, in some ways, be more humane to all employees, not just middle managers. Well, thanks for sharing that. That makes an interesting backdrop for where you've gotten to around Awakening the Corporate Soul, and then with the Purpose Revolution book, which, as you know, my show and tell, my favorite book. So tell us, what is the Purpose Revolution, and why is it really important for business to be paying attention to that today?
Right. So the Purpose Revolution is an exponential shift in values and behavior among 3 groups: customers, employees, and investors. It's global, it's cross-generational, and the shift is something like this. We want all the things we've always wanted. We want, if I'm an employee, I want a great career, a good salary, I want to be treated well, but I also now want a sense of purpose. I want to feel that this work I'm doing aligns with my values, and that I'm getting to make the world a better place, and however I define that in my job. And we'll talk about the evidence behind that. Customers want everything we've always wanted: products that excite us and meet our needs at a price that we feel is valuable, with service that's great. But now we want something else. We also want to buy from and support businesses that align with our values. We want to feel that we're doing good with our purchases, or at the very least that we're not causing harm. I call it guilt-free consumption. And then third, investors are also in this party. The largest growth of investment in the world are socially responsible investing. And more what you see is people say, I want to make money, but I want to make money by investing in things that are leveraging good. And that's from big pension funds to the average investor. So Sue, what that revolution is an exponential shift in expectations that's cross-generational. And I always say it's felt most significantly among employees. We have a little phrase in the book. We say employees are in already, in the sense that about 80% of employees say having purpose matters to them. About 55% of millennials say they would give up, and Gen Z said they would give up money, to have more purpose in their job. The employees are already in, and it makes sense because this is your entire life, whether you work with purpose or not. Customers want in, but they got a lot of other things on their mind, and investors are thinking about coming in. So while the waves are at different levels, they're all coming together. So that's what the revolution is about. And those businesses that respond to this desire for purpose are in fact outperforming significantly those that are not.
So purpose is a way that companies can kind of take advantage of this perfect storm that you're talking about, where customers, employees, and investors are all putting, shining the light really on, okay, yes, you have to have a great product, but everybody's kind of wanting that added piece. Well, so like, how is that playing out in this age of disruption kind of in general? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I just did an interview in Spain, and of course, Spain, as you know, was one of the hardest hit countries with the virus. And so one of the questions was, will purpose survive COVID, right? And I think that the best data point we have to ask that question is what happened to purpose during the Great Recession. Because I was asked that same question after Lehman Brothers went out of business and the stock market crashed and the Great Recession. People said to me, so that's it, right? Sole purpose is gone now. And I said, no. What's going to happen is it'll have a brief pause while people are trying to survive. But on the other side of it, it will be more important to people than it was before. And I think it is exactly what happened. And Sue, it's exactly what will happen this time. And here's why. Because all over the world, people are realizing the impact that business and how businesses act have on their daily lives. Whether you make sure I'm safe when you go into your restaurant, or you make sure I'm safe if I'm your employee, or how are you contributing in terms of supporting people while this economic crisis is going on. So I think that actually purpose is going to be even more important. So those companies that take the foot off the gas now will really pay a hefty price, because the more difficult things are, the more people realize the role that business plays. And by the way, we're now just like, I just read a very depressing blog yesterday called "These Are the Good Old Days, Enjoy It." And it basically said that just after this crisis comes the climate crisis that will be even harder to get a vaccine for than the COVID crisis. And so these are actually the good old days. But my point is not to depress people, but that in this age where we may be dealing with continual crisis, people are going to expect even more from companies than they did before. So those who really are in the game are going to have a real chance to contribute and a chance to differentiate. So it's not going away. It's going to be deeper when this is done, not less so.
Well, one of the things that we heard from some of the smaller up-and-coming companies last week that were part of the summit is, it's actually really tough. There is this additional pressure. Yes, the big companies are feeling it, but small ones are as well. And, they've incorporated purpose into their core DNA, but then, there's, excuse me, a lot of financial pressures. And, I think for a lot of companies, they're going to be looking at how do we in the short term stay alive, whether that means cutting some corners here or there. So like, what are some of your thoughts about like, how can people stay focused on, all right, if you can find a way through it, it is going to be, as you're saying, a longer term advantage because it's going to absolutely be expected.
Yeah, so first of all, my heart goes out to all small business owners today. You and I probably are small business owners ourselves, but we're low overhead businesses, right? In relative terms, in the training and advising business. But I feel for those who are in high overhead businesses who suddenly are really suffering. And I know some people in that situation. Mm-hmm. First, I think just remember that, you know, one of my friend of mine says a really important thing about this moment in time. Will you be proud of how you acted in this moment a year or 2 or 5 years from now? This may be one of the most unique moments of our lifetimes. I think, you know, I'm 62, I won't say, but, you know, we're in the ballpark. She's younger than me, though. See, I was good. But she's younger than me. So anyway, you know, this may be the only time like this in our whole lifetime, we hope. And we have a chance to act in a way that will make us really proud years from now. And if I were a small business owner, I would ask myself, what would make me really proud about how I acted with my employees and my team members? Really proud of how I engaged in my community now. Really proud of how I was there for my customers now. And, you know, since there's so many different kinds of businesses, I can't answer that question for you. But I think if you ask that question, it will serve you well. And look, don't make promises you can't keep. I have a client of mine in Michigan, for example, that, you know, has made some commitments about not letting people go, but they knew they could make that commitment, right? And they knew, but don't make commitments you can't keep, but ask, will I be proud of how I was in this moment? And just remember that you know, one of the points that's rarely talked about in business is that more market share is grown during downturns than during upturns. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but it makes sense. Now, even if your business is shrinking, you might gain market share. Now, let me give you a good example, right? If I'm I'm very COVID cautious because of being 62 years old, even though I'm healthy. I'm on the faculty of a School of Medicine at UBC, so I know like the facts. You know, the people my age are still vulnerable even if you're healthy. So there's some restaurants I frequented before. There's one Italian restaurant, one Greek restaurant. The Greek restaurant is very careless around masks. Very careless in many ways, in my mind, about the precautions. I went in there once to get takeout. I'm not going back. The Italian restaurant is super cautious. Everyone has masks on. There's distancing. So who am I going to go to when this crisis is over? Well, I'm going to go to the Italian restaurant, right? Not because I'm Italian, but because, you know, I like how they showed up in this crisis. Now, they may even lose some business because they're not spacing as much, right? Or because they're being too cautious. But on the other side, their market share will probably be greater because people like me will remember and feel good about how they. So it's just a simple example, right? So remember, you're playing the long game. Right now, your business may be declining, but your market share may be growing. Or if you're in a service business like yours and mine, are you reaching out and taking an interest in adding value for clients even while they can't or won't pay you? If you do, on the other side of the crisis, you're the person they'll remember. Your market share grows when the pie comes back. But it comes from your values. I always tell people, if you're doing purpose just because people want it, you'll never be successful. If you're doing it because you believe in it and because people want it, then it will show and you'll gain advantage from it. I don't know if that answers it, but those are my rambling thoughts.
Great words to the wise. And, you know, I think one of the things that's tough, and I kind of heard it with some of the businesses we heard from last week, is, you know, you work really hard. Okay, maybe you start with an idea, then you have to pivot because you realize your original idea maybe wasn't going to be able to roll out the way you wanted it to. And then you finally feel like you have your ducks lined up, and then boom, here's COVID. But it's an opportunity, at least smaller companies can be nimble and figure out how to do exactly what you're talking about. How do you go to the next level of service to be really good to your customers and your employees, and, you know, just trust that you're doing the right thing. And it might cost you a little more in the short term, but hopefully you'll win in the longer term. So I think that was great guidance.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think in business always it's the long game. I have to actually tell my clients sometimes, especially I work, as you know, with a lot of larger companies as well. And, you know, I'll say, look, if you're playing the short game, don't waste your money on me, because nothing I'm going to teach you is going to bear fruit in the next 3 or 4 months. It's not going to like instantly turn your company. I mean, you get a little gain, but I said, but if you do the things that I'm teaching you and you take it seriously, you know, 2 to 3 years from now, you're going to bear massive fruit from this effort. And I think you always have to play the long game in business. If you're playing the short game, you can win, but you rarely win against those who are playing the long game, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that I found interesting in the book, there's been a lot of research, and you quote a lot of it about, and you've worked with a lot of companies, you've interviewed a lot of top leadership, and more people are saying, yes, we get what you're saying about purpose, and we know we should be doing it, but then there's this kind of big gap between what folks say and what's actually going on. So tell us like what you see about that, and what are some of the roadblocks that hold companies back?
Yeah, one of the concepts that Jeff and I talk about in the Purpose Revolution book is this idea of the purpose gap. And I think it's kind of unique because not a lot of people talk about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and you know, I think about my times in Great Britain, and you're riding the tube, and of course they have that, you know, mind the gap, you know, which they're always saying over the loudspeaker, mind the gap, right? Because the gap is dangerous. You know, you could fall in and kill yourself. But in business, gap is opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever there's a gap between what people want and what they feel they're getting, this is an area of great opportunity. So the good news for purpose-driven businesses, and the bad news is there is this thing called the purpose gap. So what is the purpose gap? The gap is the difference between people's expectations and what they feel they're getting. So let me talk about the gap for employees and customers. Remember, about 80% of employees say purpose matters to them. About 34% globally and in the United States of employees are purpose-driven, meaning that about 1/3 of employees, purpose is a major driver of why they work for you, why they don't, right? Whether they stay, whether they leave. And often, interestingly, they're the more talented and marketable people who are most focused on purpose, right? So 80% want it, 1/3 are acting on it regularly. But when you ask people, so does the company I work for care more about profits and its own self-interest, or the interest of its customers and communities? About 7 out of 10 people say this company mostly cares about its own interests and profits, not about doing the right thing. So that's a big gap, right? It's almost a mirror, Sue. 80% want it, 70% say, that's not the company I work for. That's not the experience I'm having day to day. So that means that that's a tremendous opportunity for those companies who close that gap. Customers have a very similar gap. About, again, 80% of customers say they want it. About 32% say they regularly reward companies whose values they believe in and punish companies that they don't. We know that customers who are connected to your values are up to 2 to 3 times more loyal, and we can talk about that later if you want, than those who connect just around your product or your service or price. But again, major gap. When you ask consumers, out of every 100 companies you do business with, how many do you know are good? And the answer is about 4 to 5 out of 100. Wow. And they say about 90% of the brands they deal with, it wouldn't matter to them if they went out of business. Think about that for a minute. 9 out of 10 brands we do business with, we say, you know, I really wouldn't care. It wouldn't really affect me if they went out of business. I wouldn't really emotionally care about that. And so again, major gap, right? So I want to buy from companies I believe in, but I have no idea who's good. There's all this greenwashing and everyone's advertising, thanking the frontline healthcare workers and telling me how they're saving the world, but I don't believe it.
Yeah.
And so again, major opportunity. And here's what we know. Those companies that close the gap get the advantage. Unilever did a study, found out that if people could close that gap of people's desire for good and their belief that your company was good, exponential gains in people's desire to buy from you if I know you're good. Problem is they don't know you're good. So what does that mean? If you have a story of good, how are you telling it? Do you tell it, whether it's employees or customers, from the moment you recruit, is that story there? From the moment you do that proposal, is that story there? At the point of purchase in a grocery store, in a restaurant, is that visible to people in a real and authentic way? Most people do a horrible job of telling their story at the point of decision making and engagement with their customers. Now, first you got to have a story of purpose, but most people do a terrible way of telling it. And in the book, we talk about some of the ways to do better at that.
Yep. Well, I know some of the, especially smaller businesses that I've worked with here in Denver, there's a little bit of reticence, like, oh, we don't want to look too self-serving, like we want, we think we have to be all altruistic about it. But if people don't know and you're doing it anyway, then they can't become your loyal supporters. And people do want to know about that stuff. So
I give you two simple examples how you can do this. Let's start with a small business. A few years ago, I was in Switzerland, in Zurich, working with like Swiss bankers around purpose. It kind of blows your mind, right? Swiss bankers who would like, I won't go into that, but anyway. And so while I was there, I started frequenting a little restaurant called Be Good. That's Be Good. That's the name of the restaurant, Be Good. And who doesn't want to be good, right? So, I start, and it's Be Good, Food with Roots or something, right? But, anybody can call their restaurant Be Good. Mm-hmm. But when I went into and it's a chain, when I went into the restaurant, first thing I noticed was a huge chalkboard, very visible, the most visible thing in the restaurant that said, what we think it means to be good. And in very visible terms, they told you 4 things that differentiated that. What they did around food, what they did around their employees, what they did about sustainability, what they did in the community. And I love that it was in chalk because it meant it changed. It wasn't just something frozen in time. Every once in a while, they changed it right there at the point of purchase. So not only was the food good, but I felt good going there because right there, they told me, here's what we mean to be good. Second example, a large telecommunications company client of mine that knows that the CEO who I interview in the book says that when it comes to purpose, it's all things being equal. I won't buy from you if your product is inferior, if the price is way, way over another price, if your service is poor. All things being equal, purpose is a differentiator. So in all their large proposals now, business proposals, they have a section that says why you should feel good about buying from us.
Interesting.
And in that, every proposal now, it says, and it's updated regularly, here's all the things we are doing that make us one of the best corporate citizens in Canada. Because here's what they know, all things being equal, is that story visible? A big buyer at Kimberly-Clark told me that they were trying to sell a sustainable paper product to a big company. And the company said, no, it's too expensive. And but then at the end, they said something that really struck them. The buyer said, but of course, if the price were similar, I would always choose the sustainable option. Mm-hmm. So the salespeople got depressed, but the head of sales got excited. He said, he just gave us a great piece of information. All things being equal, I would always choose the good option. So the question is, can you communicate that story in every way, in a powerful way, whether you're a little restaurant or a big company? Is that story visible and real? By the way, who's the most believable person to tell that story? Your employees. We talk about in the book, people believe only about 16% of the advertising companies do. You run expensive ads telling us how good you are, how you're purpose-driven, 16% believability. 80% believability if an employee says it. So you better know whether your employees believe in your purpose, think you're purpose-focused, you should be surveying it, and you should be equipping them with both the information to tell your story and also asking them to tell your story. Because when they tell your story on social media, whether you're a small business or a large business, people believe it. When you say it, only 16% believability, even if you're really good at it.
Yep. So what about the role of consumers? Because through social media, I completely agree that employees have a mouthpiece out there that maybe they didn't have before social media, but so do consumers. So it's not just friends and family of employees, but it's also, you know, you buy something, you track it. Like that seems like that's another way that companies are getting the word out, is because of who uses their product or service. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, you know, social media per se is not my expertise. I mean, I probably know more than the average person, but it's not, you know, my area of expertise. But I'll say this, that of course, in the old days, you know, they used to say the average, you know, happy customer tells, you know, 1 to 4 people, and the average unhappy customer tells 18 to 20. Now, we all know now those numbers are exponential, right? It's still true that unhappy people talk a lot more on social media than happy people do.
Yeah.
So the first thing is you gotta really look for what in the book we talk about, areas of purpose incongruence, meaning the mistakes you make, the areas where you are not aligned with your purpose are very vulnerable in terms of social media, because people are more likely to share the mistakes you made than they are to share the good things. But the second thing is to remember in the social media world that stories are the most addictive thing. So if you want people to share the story of your purpose, don't share facts, share stories, because stories connect to emotion, right? So that's the best advice I can give, is if there's stories of how you've made a difference for employees, customers, community, you know, investors, you know, tell that story and try and tell it in a compelling way, and it's more likely to be viral. And ask your employees to amplify it, ask your customers to amplify it. I've learned you can't predict what goes viral. All you can do is tell good stories, and there's a good chance that people will tell your story. But again, remember, the mistakes are more likely to get amplified. That's as true in the virtual world as it is. And let me just say, Sue, because all of us are consumers as well, who want more companies to be purpose-focused. We as customers have to do a much better job of supporting companies when they do the right thing. And I give you 2 examples. I have a telecommunications client of mine that took a stand about climate change. They happen to do a lot of business in a part of the world that produces a lot of oil. They got lambasted on social media for taking that stand on climate. The CEO said to me, and I'll quote, "Where the hell were all those purpose-driven consumers when we needed them to thank us for taking that stand?" You know, when Starbucks took that stand around, you know, immigration, when the Trump administration, I don't want to get political, but when the Trump administration was vilifying immigrants, right? You know, I don't care what spectrum you're on, this is just the fact of what was happening. Starbucks took a stand about hiring immigrants. Now, they also, by the way, have and continue to have an intense program of hiring veterans, right? As they have for many years. And and they got attacked, by many. And I said on social media, look, if you believe in what Starbucks is doing, this is the time to get on social media and support them. Because if you want good companies to do good things, when they need you and you believe in what they did, take your time to support it. So we're all kind of complicit in non-purpose driven companies, not only in terms of punishing companies when they do bad, but saying, hey, I am with you when you do good, right?
Well, I know some of the companies and nonprofits that I help measure their social impact, when they try to get feedback, it's just what you're saying. It's either the people that love you to death, that'll have something to say, or the people that are ticked off for some reason. Like, it always seems like there's more of them, but they're more motivated to actually step up and say something. So
yeah, of course, like if I have a bad experience in a restaurant, I am more motivated than if I'm really pleased. It's like when you're hungry, you seek food. When you're satiated, you go, isn't that nice? I had a great meal tonight. I don't really need to tell anybody, So we have to encourage them to tell. And, so.
And I think your point about if you are applauding offline, okay, that company did a good thing. I care about them because they've got a good product, all things being equal, and they took a stand or they did something good. Like even to just it doesn't take much time to like something on Instagram, make a little comment, keep up the good work.
Exactly. Yep.
People are actually paying attention and following that. I think that's a great point. And, I know sometimes I'm in such a rush that I don't pause to do those things. And I'm, a geek on this stuff. So I probably do it more than the average person, but if more people.
Yeah. And as customers, we can have a huge impact, right? I always say one reason I am such an advocate for sustainable business is because I actually believe that business will lead the way in terms of social and environmental change. Governments will always be beholden to the next election. Doesn't matter what party or group you're with. The nature of politics is I'm always beholden of the next election, and I've got to get 50% or more to win. But in business, 10% of customers can be the difference between a business being profitable or losing money. 10%. So that means if even 10% of consumers are active, we can change the world. We don't need 51%. If 10% of us care about something and we support companies who are doing it and don't support companies who aren't, we can literally change the world without ever getting 51% around any issue, right? So the potential of consumers and business to change, and business is thinking beyond the next election. The best CEOs are thinking 5 and 10 years out, 20 years out, the best ones. And so I believe business will have to lead the way because it's the part of the system that's thinking often, ironically. Government should be thinking long-term, but it rarely is.
Yep. And I think the people that think, oh, well, nonprofits, that's their job. It's like no one silo can do it all, but I think I completely agree with you that the power of business to start really moving the needle on social and environmental change, it's huge. And I think people are more and more onto that. You've been onto it for a really long time. And, I like to think I have been too. But there's still some people that, they are thinking too short term and too bottom line. That's my own personal opinion. So one of the things that you claim in your book is that most companies are sort of failing at purpose. So tell us more about that. Why is that? And I think you've made a strong case that consumers and employees want this. So why isn't it happening? And what can leaders do actually?
Yeah, and it's not a claim, it's actually the CEOs themselves believe it. Big global study we cite in the book. About 80%, by the way, is an interesting number because it's about 8 to 10 in almost everything around purpose. But, over 80% of CEOs of large companies say if I could activate purpose in my company, it would have an impact on my profitability and the success of my business. Then when you ask those CEOs, these are the people who run the companies, how effective do you think you have been at activating purpose in your company? Only about a third say we've been pretty effective. So one more gap, by the way, about 2/3 of even the people who run companies who think it matters say I haven't been able to do it, right? So companies are failing at purpose, I think, primarily because they're either not taking it seriously enough, meaning not really asking the right questions, or simply don't know how to activate it, right? So the desire is there. It's not that they don't kind of believe in purpose. In a way, they don't know how to do it. And that's why in the book, we spend so much time trying to say, here's how you do it. First, how do you articulate a purpose? How do you engage your people around your purpose? How do you engage your customers around it? How do you make it systemic in the organization, right? And so I think that purpose is like any other effort in a company, like quality or service or cost reduction. It really requires a thorough kind of shakeout of the whole business and how you're running it, right? And again, if you're a small business, that shakeout doesn't have to be, frankly, if you're a small business, you could make some of these changes in a super short amount of time, right? Like if you read my book and wanted to do this as a large business, it might take you a couple of years to really make big progress. In a small business, you can make progress in a few months by following these simple formulas, right? So anyway, I think most companies either fail to really articulate a purpose or they're just not systemic in how they implement it. Because it's like any other change, right? If you're just kind of half paying attention to it, it just won't be enough, right? And interestingly, Sue, a little purpose may be more dangerous than no purpose, because the only thing worse than not having a purpose is having a purpose that people don't believe in, that they make fun of. Like, oh yeah, right. We say we're really there for communities, and everybody in the company goes, yeah, right. We don't, exhibit A, exhibit B. I don't think so, right? So
Right.
you have to be careful. If you're not going to live it, don't activate it. Now, having said that, you don't have to be perfect at it. And it turns out customers and employees don't expect us to be perfect. They do expect us to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's big. We don't have to be perfect, but we have to be authentic.
So some of the bigger companies that you've worked with that have decided, okay, we get that this is important and we want to take some steps to really integrate purpose in, like what's the low-hanging fruit? What do you see them trying to start with? And then, I mean, like you say, small companies are nimble, maybe can do it much quicker, but like, what's some of the sequencing you see bigger companies taking on?
Well, I think that, first of all, leaders play such an important role in this kind of work. And that's whether you're a small business or a large business, right? So I think the first thing is the leaders getting in touch with their own purpose. And that's really so important, right? One of the companies we work with, Heineken in Mexico, which is the largest Heineken company in the world. They like beer in Mexico, and Heineken's very successful. Have a lot of beers like Tecate, et cetera. And when Dolf Vandenbrink became the new CEO there, he's from the Netherlands, he wanted to reimagine the purpose of Heineken in Mexico. The first thing he did was went away on a retreat. But before they even talked about the purpose of Heineken Mexico, each person was led through to each leader to identify their own purpose. And I love what Dolph said. If you ask people like you and I, what's your purpose in your life? Almost no one says my purpose is to make money, to accumulate things, to have power. Most people say for my family to have a better life, to be a loving person, to to be respected and admired by other people, to, et cetera. And only then, after people reconnected with their own purpose, did they ask the question, what's the purpose of Heineken Mexico? By the way, the purpose they came up with, which is a beautiful purpose, is to win big for a better Mexico. They said, we want to win big with great brands and great beers, but we believe Mexico is a country that has so much potential that's unrealized. We want to be one of those companies that helps Mexico fulfill its highest potential. And it caused them, by the way, to do things like take on domestic violence in Mexico, which they never imagined they would, because they said one of the things holding Mexico back is domestic violence. So first thing is begin with personal purpose. One of the things we know, Sue, is that one of the best predictors of employees being engaged and productive and committed is feeling they're living their purpose in their day-to-day job, even more than believing in the purpose of the company. So start asking each person to identify their purpose. And I've asked people that question all over the world with 2 minutes to think about it, less than 2 minutes. 90% of people can identify their purpose with less than 2 minutes to think about it. Start asking people to identify their purpose, then ask them, how do you get to live that purpose every day in your job? How might you live it more deeply, right? Begin to have more conversations about purpose in team meetings. Just ask this question: how has anyone gotten to live their purpose since the last time we were together? How have we lived our purpose? Stories, I talk about in the book, stories are the oil in the engine of purpose, right? So if I could give you one piece of advice, small company or large, first of all, as the leaders, get in touch with your purpose. Mm-hmm. Begin to talk about it and articulate it. Second, begin to ask people their purpose and begin to tell more stories and invite people to tell stories about how we are living that purpose. And you might find that suddenly this greases all kinds of wheels for things to start to happen in the company. Lots of other ideas in the book, but that's kind of like where I'd begin, because it all begins in here before it goes out there.
So like, I'm sure there's some people though that think, well, I'm selling widgets or I'm making widgets. Like, how do I connect that to what my sense of purpose is? And how can that show up in my day-to-day work life? So like, what would you say to those people? And like, what might they look for? Like, how do they treat their fellow employees maybe? Or
well, it's a great question. So because I said stories are the kind of elixir of purpose, I'll tell you a story.
Okay.
We were working with a large law firm, and around purpose, and because we believe in it, began with every person identifying their purpose, including like the senior managing partners, etc. One of the people was the receptionist, Lisa, at the corporate headquarters. Probably the least kind of high discretion job maybe in the company. Probably the lowest paid team member in the headquarters. When it came time for her to share her purpose, the senior managing partner couldn't resist. By the way, don't do this as a leader. He said, Lisa, wait. I bet I can guess your purpose. Don't do that as a leader, right? He said, I bet you I can guess your purpose. You are the first ambassador for this company. Like, you're the first person people see. You get to set the tone for, blah, blah, blah. She goes, well, thank you, Harold. You're right. That's important to me. And as I know it's really important to the company. That's my role. That's my purpose in the company. She said, but since I was asked that question, and been thinking about it, I realized that I'm a happy, optimistic person by nature. I don't know why, maybe I'm lucky. It's just the way I am. But a lot of people are not happy and a lot of people are not optimistic. She said, and I've realized my purpose is that every person who gets to deal with me for 3 seconds or 3 minutes, every day, every minute that I'm at the office will get a shot of optimism and happiness and feel better about themselves and the world than they did before they met me. She said, that's my purpose. And I get to live it every day at the front desk. Now, here's what's really interesting, Sue. In the months that followed, 2 things happened. Lisa said, suddenly, once I had identified that purpose, I kind of knew it, but I'd never identified it. Something happened because suddenly I realized how many chances I had every day to live it. I started looking for it. Harold started managing Lisa differently. He said a week later, he was passing the front desk and the grumpiest, nastiest customer the law firm has was smiling and laughing at the front desk. And that afternoon, he went up to Lisa and said, Lisa, I haven't seen that woman smile in 2 years. Thanks for living your purpose this morning. And she said, Harold, thanks for noticing. So to me, Sue, that's an example.
Yep.
Every person, trust me, no matter what job they have, a delivery person, a factory worker, there is purpose in every job. The only question as leaders is whether we have ever invited people to articulate it, to explore it, or to talk about it ourselves. And as a leader, are we connecting the dots between the widget and the purpose, right? Can I tell you one more story? I won't if we don't have time.
And that was powerful.
So I'll give you a great example in my own company. When my third book came out, Value Shift, it was the days when you still did like direct mail. So we were doing direct mailers to all these, before email, right? We're doing these direct mailers out to HR executives, right? So all week long, the people in my office are stuffing envelopes. I leave on Monday, everyone's grumpy, stuffing envelopes all week. I call in the middle of the week, how's it going? Well, in case you've forgotten, while you're on the road having fancy dinners with clients and doing keynote speeches, we're stuffing envelopes all week. And I said, look, I know stuffing envelopes is not a lot of fun. I said, but in those envelopes, some people are going to open those envelopes and buy the book. Some people are going to buy that book and change the way they lead because of it. And some people's lives are going to be changed because you sent those envelopes out. And I love Sue, who worked for me at the time, said, well, thanks, but we're kind of busy. You got anything else? And I was kind of discouraged. When I came back on Friday afternoon, when I left on Monday morning, we had a sign on the wall, books sold, because we were tracking over these number of weeks how many books were sold. They had pasted over the books sold, lives changed. And I said, come on, you did that like 5 minutes ago when you knew I was coming from the plane, right? They said, no, here's the story. Sue got off the phone, told the story, we made fun of you. But halfway through the second day, somebody said, this is the one, guys, changing somebody's life here. By about Thursday, we started to believe it because we realized what you were trying to remind us was we need people to buy books for this business to be successful, but that's not why we do it. We do it because these books are changing people's lives. And I think, Sue, I'd say whatever business you're in, as a leader, you have to first realize, how do our services and products make a difference in the lives of our customers and our community? And begin to communicate and connect the dots for people. Because every business exists because it serves a purpose. That's why people are connected to you. Every business serves a purpose in the lives of people. The only question is whether that purpose is alive or not. And we have to help people find it sometimes. That happened to me by accident with the stuffing envelopes. And I realized the power I had as a leader to communicate that. And there's other stories I tell in the book that are like that, not about myself, that I think really communicate the role we play in connecting the dots for people.
Well, I think one of the things you haven't said exactly directly, but one of the ahas I'm having that's a great reminder is sometimes companies are all about the purpose out there, and being known for, our products are doing good, we're doing good in the community, and they forget that they've actually got to treat the people inside with maybe a bit more respect. And like your example at the law firm with the receptionist and
Lisa, yeah.
like, it's a good reminder. It's like, I know I've done some retreats with organizations that everybody outside thinks, oh, they're so great. And then the level of inside, it's like it's out of sync.
Yeah, when you ask customers and employees, both separate surveys, how do you define whether a company has a sense of purpose, right? How we treat team members is like high on the list of how customers. So even I go into a store and I see that you yelled at one of your employees or treated them with a lack of dignity, that's hurting your purpose, right? Let alone the impact on the internal team members. The second thing is when you ask employees how they define purpose, while it being, doing social good and being involved in the environment is important, above that is how we treat our customers. So the basic way we do our day-to-day business, do we have their best interests in mind, is the single best predictor of whether people feel you have a sense of purpose. So, it's one reason why Amazon has a very high ratings as a purpose-driven company, even though they're doing a lot better now around social good, but they haven't historically been a big leader in that regard. But their customers feel they're there for them, right? And so, but now, they've got issues now around employees and around their social good, but they're trying to step up the bar on that. But yeah, what you said is absolutely true.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be wrapping it down here. So if anybody has a question, I want to encourage you to put it in chat because we could have time for a couple questions if you have any. So I'll just put that out there. Please feel free. Don't hold back. Go ahead and ask any questions. So what do you, any tips for leaders about how to maintain a sense of purpose during COVID? We've kind of talked about that some, but I'm just wondering if you have any additional insights.
Well, I think that one of the things is, again, go back to ask the question, would I be proud of how I was, in this moment? The second thing is to consistently allow opportunities for people to tell stories in team meetings about how are we getting to live our purpose now during this time, during COVID? How could we lean into our purpose even more deeply during this time? And again, remember, it's the long game, right? Well, even though your business may be less now, your market share will either grow or not grow on the back of this period of time. And purpose is going to be even more important to people on the other side of this, right? And stay optimistic. I have to say a word about optimism. I've spent a lot of time studying not only purpose, but what makes for an engaging leader. And it turns out being positive and optimistic is one of the single best predictors of being a highly admired leader. So make sure you stay inspired, you stay motivated, you stay optimistic, because it's a really strong predictor of your credibility as a leader.
Well, those are great words to the wise. Thank you. I see we have one comment. Great information and practical advice presented in an hour that fits my attention span. Thank you, John and Sue. So,
Thanks. That's a longer attention span than I have, so I'm impressed.
Well, we're out of time. John, thank you so much for sharing your insights on purpose. And truly, if you haven't gotten John's book and read it, I strongly encourage you to do so. It's really great. So John, how can people stay up with you and what your current thinking is? And so tell folks how to.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, thank you, Sue, for your work. You've been great, and she's great. Call her up. She can help you. If you want to reach out to me, drjohnizzo.com. That's drjohnizzo.com. drjohnizzo.com. You can, or just Google me, John Izzo, and I think I'm still the first John Izzo that shows up. And you can sign up for our bi-weekly blog and videos that we send out. It's a great way to stay in touch. It just says sign up for tips or something like that on the website. And of course, I recommend the book to people. I thank you for your recommendation. But, you know, The Purpose Revolution, I think you'll agree, is a very inspiring but also practical book. It's going to help you know how to do this. If your boss isn't with the program, give them a copy of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we didn't really get to talk about it, but, you know, there's ways that, especially having read this, even if you aren't the CEO or C-suite, there's ways you can start stepping up to be a leader within your company and start making this shift. And
very much, yeah. And whether you run one team or just a team member, you know, and we're all leaders, Sue. I have a very simple definition of leadership. A leader is anyone who has a positive influence on those around them. And I've known frontline team members who have a disproportionate positive influence on those around them and on their companies, individual supervisors who have a disproportionate positive influence on those around them. So leadership, as I said in my book, Stepping Up, is not a position. Leadership is a posture. And if you take a posture of being a leader, you'll have influence whether you have leader in your business card or not. And I like to remind people what your business card says is a very poor way to determine whether you're a leader.
Yep, I would agree with you. Thank you, John. And thank you.
You're welcome.
Here live, and thank you to those of you who are listening after the fact. Hopefully you're inspired by some of the things John was sharing, and will, whatever role you have, be a leader and really help make purpose be alive and well within the company, not just something that gets talked about. So thanks, John. Everybody, have a good day. See you at the next session.
Thank you, folks, and stay safe and be kind. Take care now.
Bye-bye.